Hello, everybody, and welcome to this last day of the Autumn School of Curating, a joint venture between two institutions in two cities of Romania, Art Encounters Foundation in Timișoara and Cluj Cultural Center in Cluj. My name is Diana Marincu, and I'm the Artistic Director of Art Encounters Foundation, working with a great team here in Timișoara, Georgia Bacinski, Gia Țidorescu, Nătzca Vasilcin, Alina Crețu, and Otilo Ertei. The other half of the School of Curating has been active in Cluj through the efforts of Corina Bucea, Oana Big, Ioana Trușcan, and Roxana Ashder, but also Georgiana Boots, who gave shape to this project and worked side by side with us until recently, and I do hope she is following us tonight. The Autumn School of Curating is a curatorial program aimed at offering young curators access to an international platform for dialogue and learning. The learning process unfolds in many ways, one of which is learning from each other, a model that encourages the non-hierarchical learning and the network between peers who can develop collaborations also in the future. I do hope from that point of view that also the participants to this year's School of Curating will keep on connecting with each other and developing things in the future. We are very honored to have curator Hajnalka Somogyi as a mentor this year, following the topic of self-organization as a tool of institutional critique and as a model for a new kind of structure in the art world. Hajnalka is one of the founders of Biennale in Budapest and has been working for many years in the field of art and activism, of art and politics. And I believe that her experience was very much appreciated by the participants. So thank you, Hajnalka, for your contribution this year. Today's program will be divided between a talk by curator Adrian Notz, the mentor of the last year's edition of the school, and then a collective talk by the participants of the school led by Hajnalka. I will now proceed at introducing Adrian, a curator who knows already very well the Romanian art scene. Currently, he's a curator for the ETHIE Center and at the Tihi Ocean Foundation, mentor also for the creative strategy and vision at the European Center for Contemporary Art in Cluj, ECA, which is also part of Cluj Cultural Center. He is also known as the king of kingdoms of Elgaland, Vergaland, and Chevalier de la Tombe de Bacuni. From 2012 and 2019, he was the artistic director of Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, after working there for many years as curatorial assistant and as co-director. Before leaving you the floor, Adrian, I would like to remind all our followers online that they can post questions and comment in the comment section of this live streaming, and then I will do my best to read them all of you afterwards, after your presentation. Adrian, a very big thank you from us, and we are really curious to listen to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Diana, for this nice introduction. I'm also very curious to hear later on about how this week went with the Autumn School of Curating on self-organization, led by Hajnalka. And my talk is maybe not so much a talk, but just a kind of story I would like to read about the so-called Banat Republic. It was something I discovered when I researched the history a little bit of Timișoara, that like 3 days, 103 years ago, the Banat Republic was proclaimed here in Timișoara. And I think this moment, like for example, today is the 103rd death anniversary of Guillaume Apollinaire. He died today on the 6th of November, 1918. It was also the moment where this is all this Dada flashbacks, so to say, where Arthur Craven, boxer and poet, lover of Mina Loy, who wrote the first feminist manifesto, disappeared in the Pacific, somewhere in the south in Oaxaca. It's also the moment when Tristan Tzara and Francis Picabia got in contact and basically made Dada not a local thing of Zurich, but something international. And yeah, so of course, it's also the end of the First World War in a couple of days. On the 11th November, the First World War will end. So maybe my small story about the Banat Republic can be something like, let's call it an appetizer or an aperitif for the presentation afterwards. I will just read it to you. The Banat Republic, and I will try and read it a little bit in this kind of David Attenborough style. Hours after the dissolution of the Austria-Hungary, the local communities of the vast Pannonian Basin assembled to form the Republic of Hungary, to fill the power vacuum before it would slurp up itself or be ripped apart by the new dark kingdoms luring at its mountain borders. In the southeastern part of this massive swamp plain, between the three rivers Danube, Tisa, Mureș, and at the foot of the Carpats hills, a separatist group, the Bănățeans, if there is such a word, had their own idea about how to fill the vacuum and how to prevent the partition among the competing and rapidly approaching nationalisms. They envisioned a peaceful cooperation among the diverse ethnicities and looked to Switzerland and its federalistic model of cantons. They wanted the Banat Republic. In one of those nights of exponentially growing anti-war protests in Timișoara, where the people went out to topple monuments of Austrian authorities from their pedestals, it was that the Banat Republic was proclaimed, possibly on Halloween night, the Orthodox Day of the Dead of the 31st of October, or on the Mexican Dia de los Muertos on the 2nd of November in 1918. The Orthodox Day of the Dead was claimed by Lieutenant Colonel Albert Barta, who was attempting to organize a Hungarian front against the advancing French Danube army. When the old ladies were selling fat candles and autumn flowers in the markets and the cemeteries were brightly lit at night for a festive memorial of the passed away, Barta created the Republic as a buffer zone. As it quite often is with copyrights and claims and authorships, the question we know from the Swiss Ricola advertisement, who invented it, is topic of debate. Politician Otto Roth, a member of the Hungarian Social Democratic Party, the MSZDP, says that he approached Barta the night before Halloween and spoke with him in the military casino in Timișoara. According to Roth, they didn't proclaim the Republic on Halloween, but simply expressed their mutual support of the concept. Some local Freemasons were also involved. And on Dia de los Muertos, red socialist flag-swinging members of the MSDCP formed the People's Council and the Republic government by means of a large assembly in Liberty Square. They too needed this buffer zone between nationalistic powers converging around the prosperous Banat Plains. On that day, when the ancestors could return from the dead, the MSDCP comrade Otto Roth was elected president of the Republic. In this crazy carnival in which everyone played at turning the world upside down, the freshly crowned carnival president and his boy bishops, May queens, lords of misrule, abbots of unreason, and princes of Scyths built the giant wicker dragon and set it on fire. All formal ranks disintegrated into one or other form of bacchanalian chaos and arose as the Banat Republic. Slightly overwhelmed by their act, they blushed and shuddered themselves to regain composure for a moment. Stiffly, they announced the new federalistic republic of all ethnicities from the balcony of the Timișoara City Hall. The speech act ritual was made, and the assembly said yes to their new marriage. After a short shock moment, they fell back in their collective chaos, effervescence, liminality, and creative play, out of which new social forms came into the world. Channeling their effervescence, they burst out singing Hungary's hymnus and La Marseillaise waving the red flags, which became the official flag of the Banat Republic. Bluntly ignoring the second most deadly wave of the Spanish flu, killing millions, more than the First World War itself, they celebrated until dawn in close dialogue with their ancestors and the ancestors of others. Most of them awoke the next morning with a brutal hangover and some palinka-induced blackout amnesia. All their collective visions of a Banat commons retreated into that part of their head where a small vacuum of non-headache remained and illusion had its humble shack. The fall sun was bright that next morning, and even the gallons of Turkish coffee and slices of pork bacon they stuffed into themselves could not prevent them from falling back into their old persona. For most, the carnival was over, and everyday life, which was a tumultuous life of political revolutions and deadly fights, took over again. Albert Barta, who had kissed and hugged Roth, even fooled around with his moustache the night before in drunken stupor, remembered his military persona quite clearly and sat up straight at his breakfast table, stiff as his uniform. Power. He wanted more power. Now that his one-night stand lover Roth was president, he had to try something different. He had to do what he anyway wanted to do and had been planning for a while already. He remembered his other bromance, Mihaly Karolyi. Karolyi headed the freshly born Republic of Hungary. Even if both young republics were clearly hardcore anti-Habsburgian, Karolyi and Hungary's own republican regime sought to preserve as much as possible from the older kingdom's territory and to resist the advance of competing Romanian and Serb nationalisms with its borders. The Banat Republic was just a means to an end for Karolyi. In their strange ménage à trois, where Albert Barta created a buffer zone mainly out of himself, Roth's proclamation of the Banat Republic was clearly a declaration of independence for him and his followers, whereas the Republican officials around Karolyi openly acknowledged that their ultimate plan was to create a federal and democratic Hungary with units modeled on the Swiss cantons. So not the Banat Republic itself was to become the Switzerland of the Pannonian Basin, but Hungary. The Banat, in that sense, might just be one canton. In a ridiculing and paternalizing way, Roth's polity was occasionally referred to as the Banat Autonomous Republic, or as a limited autonomy within the Magyar state. For Karolyi and Barta, the Roth Republic might have been what the canton of Jura, where half a century before the anarchist Jura Federation was formed, hallucinogenic absinthe is produced, and Swiss watchmaking comes from, still is for Switzerland, a renitent region of autonomous, self-organized rebels. Also, in the lower ranks of the newborn Banat Republic, the spirit of a collective ethnically diverse common drifted quickly apart that morning after. The idea of diversity exploded into clusters of diverging interests, forming clear borders and groups of the us and the others, friends and enemies, with the community that was supposed to unite against the bigger threats and enemies from the outside, within the community that was supposed to unite against the bigger threats and enemies from the outside, the Romanian and Serbian nationalisms advancing. The seldom exception of understanding echoed as an illusional dream, and the normal state of not understanding prevailed again. The Banat Romanians flocked themselves together again. The Banat Serbs flocked themselves, and even the shepherds and peasants in the prosperous fields followed the role model of their sheep and flocked together. All these flocks, as single isolated entities, opposed to the flocks of the Banat Hungarians and Swabians, and engaged in an intense cannibalistic infight right after the last chunk of bacon had reached their round beer bellies on the morning after the Night of the Dead, not only swallowing and devouring each other like greedy pigs, but also kicking the federalistic, decentralized, and multi-ethnic ideals of commons and communities from the day before like a sick stray dog off the sidewalk. It therefore wasn't too surprising that the Banat Republic dissolved almost as fast as it was created. And by the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, when the Great War ended after Germany, bereft of manpower and supplies and faced with imminent invasion, signed an armistice agreement with the Allies in a railroad car on the countryside in France at 5 a.m. in the morning, also the Banat Republic ended. A day later, the Royal Serbian Army invaded the region endorsed by Hungary and the Allies. Some French and African troops camped outside of Timișoara, and when the tensions between Romania and Yugoslavia started to escalate, they occupied the strongly contested capital city of the Banat Republic. In the following years, the Franco-Romanian bromance, filled with bloody battles and tumultuous riots, finally led to the point where big parts of the Banat Republic were included in the Kingdom of Romania. The morning after the festive and ecstatic Night of the Dead, for a few, the carnival was not over and changed their everyday life radically. The night was a pivot, like the essence of the Timișoara history over the last centuries. They had followed the carnival rules of the Days of the Dead and spoke with their ancestors and with the ancestors of their ancestors and with the ancestors of those as well. They were struck by the fact that in their ancient world, whether in India, China, or Greece, philosophy was written almost exclusively in form of dialogue, even if it is often the kind of dialogue where only one guy does 95% of the talking. Thought, self-reflective consciousness, that which we tend to see us making us truly human, was assumed to be a collective and dyadic, but sometimes was assumed to be collective and dyadic, but something that almost by definition couldn't be done all by oneself. Or rather, solitary reflection was usually the ultimate goal. The aim of philosophy of their ancestors was to cultivate yourself to the point where individual self-consciousness might be possible. They had visited all different philosophical schools, from Buddhism to Stoicism, and experienced that they tended to employ different forms of meditation, diet, spiritual exercises as means of ultimately attaining the status of a sage who really could be a self-conscious individual. But it was only by starting with dialogue that one had any chance of getting there. They understood as clearly as any way possible that dialogue was the only point of departure that could be taken on that morning, the day after, because they had understood from their animistic travels through the nature of things that Christian thought had moved them away from dialogue. They had also understood that the French philosopher, mathematician, and scientist Descartes, a human being unnaturally driven by logic and rationality 3 centuries ago, had completely turned things around by starting with the self-conscious individual and only then asking how that individual can have any kind of communicative relation with anyone else. They saw that that was the basis of all subsequent European philosophy. They also saw, with some Roma futuristic vision, how absurd it would be, as almost a century later, neuroscience would show the ancients were right. Real thought is almost entirely dialogic. The cognitive scientists they talked to in the future usually didn't say it explicitly, because for some reason they too would have a strange mental block on conversation, but they did make it clear to them that what's called the window of consciousness, that time during which most of us actually are full self-aware, self-reflective beings, is rare and brief. It averages around maybe 7 seconds. Otherwise, you are generally operating on autopilot. The autopilot, most of the others had switched on again on that bright sunny fall morning after the carnival night of the dead. The few of them had learned in their orgiastic symposium of dialogues with ancestors and descendants that the window of consciousness, the time during which most of us actually are self-aware and self-reflective beings, could be expanded eternally if they were talking to someone else. Of course, they could have conversations on autopilot too, but if they were really interested and engaged with someone else, they could maintain it for hours. The implications of this are profound, even though one only rarely seems to acknowledge it. Most self-aware thought takes place at exactly the moment when the boundaries of the self are least clear. This small spark lit a flame that rose into a conflagration in the deepest and darkest of all nights. This small group of a few separate individuals, of which no names were passed on into the fog of history, united their spirits that morning. They did not only find a way of how to collectively apart turn over the false nationalistic and romantic ideas of enlightenment that another guy 3 centuries ago had created in Switzerland's separatist Jura, daydreaming in a small rowing boat in the middle of Lake Biel. Rousseau had there discovered the subject and the self in a state of reverie. His finding gave rise, in the dawn of modernity, to Romanticism, thus contributing to the formation of societies in which modern man lives. Because he could not keep his humble discovery to himself, he created the romantic idea of the genius and creative human being, which was not driving the few in Timișoara too much, but a century later would be the all-dominating imperative and dispositive. It was not by introspection, as the two romantic rationalists wanted humans to believe, that one reached the end point of every possible revolt against the tyranny of the real. The fleeting, complete relief from worry, stress, and reality was not gained by pure subjectivity that shone subversively and irresistibly from within themselves, so they could become an exemplary good-for-nothing, unworldly and unusable, more happy animal than superhuman, more dreamer than character, more emigrant than do-gooder, more vacationer than entrepreneur. The entry into a state of exquisite uselessness in which they detached themselves from their mundane, panicked identities, and in the freedom of unbridled imagination, they moved far away from panic. They became free because they succeeded in the conquest of carelessness in dialogue with others going beyond themselves. They discovered, when talking to their ancestors, some of which they totally detested with furious disgust, that they were the most useless people in the world. Their carnival could begin. From the societies of the Kakutl, they learned that times of seasonal congregation were also ritual seasons, almost entirely given over to dances, rites, and dramas. Sometimes these could involve creating temporary kings or even a ritual police with real coercive powers, though often, peculiarly, these ritual police doubled as clowns. In other cases, they involved dissolving norms of hierarchy and propriety, as in the Inuit midwinter orgies. They observed this dichotomy in festive life almost everywhere and at any time. They realized that in the crazy carnivals in which everyone played at turning the world upside down, they ignited the old spark of political self-consciousness, and they felt they needed to keep it alive. With their Banat Republic Carnival, they allowed people to imagine that other arrangements are feasible, even for society as a whole, since it was always possible to fantasize about a carnival bursting its seams and becoming the new reality. When talking to their ancestors in Babylon, they were told the popular story of Semiramis, the eponymous servant girl convinced the Assyrian king to let her be queen for a day during some annual festival. And she promptly had him arrested, declared herself empress, and led her new armies to conquer the world. They also learned from not so distant ancestors that May Day came to be chosen as the date for the International Workers' Holiday, largely because many British peasants in revolts had begun on that riotous festival. It seemed that villagers who played turning the world upside down would periodically decide they actually preferred the world upside down and took measure to keep it that way. For the freshly obsessed few of the Knights of the Dead, this was too the case. They wanted to keep the world upside down. When traveling to the Middle Ages, they saw that medieval peasants often found it much easier than medieval intellectuals to imagine a society of equals. They started to begin to understand why. For the last 1,000 years of their ancestors and their own human history, carnivals played much the same role in fostering political self-consciousness and as laboratories of social possibilities. The first kings may have been play kings. Then they became real kings. And a century later, most existing kings and queens would be reduced once again to play kings, mainly performing ceremonial functions and no longer wield real power. They knew, by the pressure of the kingdoms of Yugoslavia and Romania squeezing towards their island of uselessness, which they named the Banat Republic, that even if all monarchies, including ceremonial monarchies, were to disappear, some people would still play at being kings. And even in the European Middle Ages, in places where monarchy was unquestioned as a mode of government, abbots of unreason or Yuletide kings and the like tended to be chosen either by election or by sortition, the very form of collective decision-making that resurfaced apparently out of nowhere in the Enlightenment. For a great many societies, the festive year could be read as a veritable encyclopedia of possible political forms. And thus, the carnival of the Banat Republic would be their society of self-organization. The Germans in the group of this carnivalistic Banat tribe started talking about a descendant of theirs who would apply something called system theory on society. In that system theory, they explained to others self-organization is a form of system development in which form-giving or shaping influences, shaping influences come from the elements of the system itself. An ancestor of the system theory master, a young girl named Nicola, then took over the conversation and explained, in process of self-organization, structural orders or pattern formation are achieved without these demonstrably arising from external controlling influences or being linearly attributed to specific causes. This often spontaneous emergence of patterns of order out of the system dynamics is called emergence or emergent phenomena. A state of emergency is always a state of emergence, some of the Roma members answered in chanting choir, intuitively referring to a descendant from their ancestors from the Indian subcontinent. Unperturbed, the German girl continued. There are three interdependent criteria that must be fulfilled in order to speak of self-organization in system theory. First, the evolution of a system into a spatially and temporally organized structure without external interventions. Second, the autonomous movement into smaller and smaller regions of phase space. And third, the development of correlations of spatio-temporal patterns between previously independent variables whose evolution is only under the influence of local rules. Nobody really understood what she was saying. It seemed too abstract and theoretical, almost like a technical manual. Nicola got the feedback vibes and tried to break it down a bit. She continued in a very serious way. Okay, we can make a distinction between autogenous self-organization, that is arising from one's own forces, and autonomous self-organization, that is self-determined. We want both, the young group shouted. We want to be self-determined and arise from our own forces. Yes, yes, we can have both, Nicola replied calmly. Listen how we can define the two. Autogenous self-organization is defined by three characters. The group frowned a bit, fearing she might dive into some abstract and technical descriptions again, and they were right. The first character of autogenous self-organization, Nicola said, is that it is self-referential. Self-organizing systems are self-referential and exhibit operational closure. That is, every behavior of the system acts back on itself and becomes the starting point for further behavior. Thus, it acts circularly. Operationally closed systems do not act on the basis of external environmental influences, but according to the forms of information generation and processing that have developed within them, quasi out of themselves. Self-reference, and thus informational closeness, do not, however, represent a contradiction to the energetic openness of systems. The second character is path dependency. This means that the development path that has been taken cannot easily be left. And the third character of an autogenous self-organization is indeterminacy. This means that the course the development will take is ultimately unpredictable. The indeterminacy depends on coincidences. A small change of the initial conditions can lead to completely different paths. Oh, great, the animistic tribe who had talked to the dead exclaimed, "We love coincidences and indeterminacy." Is that like the quantum definition of the universe? A small boy named Irvin asked, gently caressing his pisica, purring on his lap. I don't know, Nicola answered the boy. But let me explain the other possible self-organization, the autonomous self-organization. Autonomous self-organization can also be defined by three features. The first one is, of course, autonomy. Self-organizing systems are autonomous when the relationships and interactions that define the system as an entity are determined only by the system itself. Autonomy refers only to certain criteria as a material and energetic exchange relationship with the environment continues to exist. In vertical autonomy, decision-making freedoms of subordinate units are sharply separated. With horizontal autonomy, areas on one level are independent of each other. We are autonomous, no? If we just proclaimed the Banat Republic, an old lady asked her neighbor standing next to her. Nicola continued. The second character of an autonomous self-organization is centralization and decentralization. This is simple, and it is mainly about how we do decision-making. With the delegation of decision-making authority on lower level, one speaks of decentralization. Are the decision-making authorities delegated on upper levels, however, of centralization? And the third character, finally, is redundancy. In self-organizing systems, there is no fundamental separation between organizing, shaping, or directing parts. All parts of the system represent potential shapers. Several parts can do the same thing, which provides a kind of abundance that is redundancy. Redundancy can increase autonomy because there is no strict division of labor. Nicola finished. The carnival whisperers of the dead burst out in deep conversation. Okay, dearest Nicola, this is all still very theoretical and technical, but also super inspiring. How can we now implement self-organization into our Banat Republic? I think, a trickster in the group continued, we need to refer this more to a community, a collective, commons, or a group. It certainly has to be a smaller entities than so-called societies, nations, or even humanity. And it certainly also has to be bigger entities than just oneself, a dozen selves, or 100 selves. Yes, totally, said Lulu, the lunatic witch. Also, if I understood Nicola right, self-organization refers mostly to a process. And self-organization is a spontaneous order. It is a process where some form of overall order arises from interaction between parts of a disordered system. The process can be spontaneous when sufficient energy is available. And oh yes, we have more than efficient energy among us. When we are in this highly energetic process of conversation between us, we do not need control by any external agent because we are totally triggered by all random fluctuations and amplifying ourselves and our processes by positive feedbacks. Oh, okay, intervened the troubadour. Then our resulting organization is wholly decentralized, distributed over all the components of the system, distributed over all of us. The dancing devil then swooned. Yes, as such, the organization is typically and fantastically robust and able to survive and self-repair substantial perturbations. Wow. He was drawn away for a moment and started dancing again and exclaimed, self-organization is an island of predictability in a sea of chaotic unpredictability. And we can be an archipelago of islands, answered Hans Ulrich, the turbo interviewer. Everybody laughed because he had been using this concept for ancestorial times, and everybody rejoiced because he was right. The archipelago could be what they had celebrated in the Night of the Dead, the Swiss idea of federalistically organized republic. They were aware that this idea from exactly 60 years ago, when also Karol Barbosz, as they like to call him, released his manifesto, was not totally waterproof. It sounded lovely like sweet Swiss chocolate in theory, but in reality, it was a bit narrow-minded. The federalistic structures did not replace state and centralist institutions, but camouflaged them. A shower of fancy words out of context rushed through their bodies and gave them excited shudders. Participative, agile, decentralized, evolutive, free, open, independent, diverse, a grassroots movement. And thus, this playful tribe who had spoken to the dead and their ancestors danced out into the streets and carried on the flame of a carnivalistic Banat Republic, where the world was turned upside down and all of their illusion and ideas and wishes and dreams were the spice that formed reality. They knew, as it often is with seminal ideas, they needed decades to prosper and blossom, but they knew their descendants, possibly a century later, would continue their carnival and inspire more than just a few for a Banat Republic based on dialogue. the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. So let's see. Adrian, we are in the same office, although your background doesn't say that. So we will have to mute ourselves one at a time. Thank you. So thank you so much for this story. I was really impressed by this new use of the Socratic method in order to reach some conclusions, and also of the characters that you introduced in the story. And I think also it relates very well to the whole topic of the curatorial school this year. I think you touched also very hilariously and ironically in some points also some of the utopian things related to self-organization and the ideals of this non-hierarchical model. I would have some questions, but first I will open the discussion towards Hajnalka and the participants.
First of all, thank you so much. It is really funny and witty, and as if you have taken, you know, the notions of the very dry presentation I gave the first day, and you kind of, you know, putting it together with your experiences in the Banat, so you kind of created this beautiful story out of it. So I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for it. Yeah, it really spoke to our last week in many levels. For sure. And what you will see in the next hour is actually your beautiful story like falling apart again into a bunch of words that don't have like any meaningful connection yet. But you will see it a little bit later. That's also the beauty of trying to do something together. Sometimes it just takes more time. So yeah, I'm amazed. Actually, we are working on a publication on self-organization. So I would really like to discuss with you the possibility of perhaps, you know, publishing in some form this story.
Yeah, that would be nice. Thank you. I'm happy that you liked the story, because I was a little insecure about my knowledge on self-organization. But in a way, as I'm the only one who actually physically did the Autumn School while you were discussing, how do you say, during the whole week with a lot of presentations and talks, I kind of composed this story traveling through the Banat Republic in different fields, so to say.
Yeah, you got the gist of it.
That's good.
Also the gist of, you know, Central Europeanness in a way. Our intertwined histories.
Yeah, that's a very complex. I mean, I just, you know, from this historical event, I just took out a very small part because it's so complex constellation, and that's just in only these 2 weeks that the Banat Republic actually existed. So confusing. So I thought I'd just make it more confusing. Maybe that helps.
Really nice.
Well, first of all, thank you. I really enjoyed, even if I joined a little bit later than expected. But I really appreciate like the good use of humor, which is not easy, and also like it was a performance. I mean, a reading performance. With that background and everything, and yes, it's a very good adaptation to this online format, and that's nice. Yes, so thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? If not, Adrian, perhaps you can share a bit with us, besides your interest in the historical facts and, the starting point of your story, which then unfolded in a more creative, also literary, but also in a more creative way, your starting point from your personal experience with working with institutions. How much was here, how much you put here from personal experience, perhaps facts or situations you were in, and this whole idea of a system where you said, that all parts of the system can shape the system itself and so on. Some of the ideas that were mentioned in your story, how much are they actually coming from your experience in an institution which was a very experimental model from what I could see, Cabaret Voltaire? Perhaps it would be interesting to know that.
The ideas about self-organization I talked about is mainly theory. It's not, I'm not talking out of experience, because in that sense, in Cabaret Voltaire, we were a little bit, how would you say, it wasn't really a we, it was like I did everything myself, and I had like, but the we in that sense was more created together with artists when you collaborate and cooperate with them, or also with activists like with the Yes Men, for example, and Reverend Billy and so on. So in that sense, it wasn't like, if you want to make the separation between, let's say, the program and the institution was just kind of, carried by me more or less and my business manager. And then the content was always, for me, always a moment of self-organizing, of a very closed, I like to call it embedded curating, where you work very closely with artists together, with activists, with thinkers and so on, to then, in that sense, in the best case, come up with a new idea and do something new. But I think the idea of, what was it, autogenous or autonomous? Autogenous self-organization system is, it only works in theory and maybe in, I don't know, in computer science and artificial intelligence. But of course, as artists or working together with artists, there's always some external influence coming into the system. And in that sense, it's not an isolated self-organization. It's more like this, I think the conversation and dialogue of which I talked at the beginning is much more important, where you also get a lot of new inputs. So yeah, I think the institutions is maybe more the first part of the Banat Republic, where you have to, have these etiquettes and personas that fight for certain power structures. So that's maybe more institutional experience I had. That's it.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? If not, perhaps, yeah, go ahead.
It might be a little bit funny what I'm going to ask you. Just what is your stance regarding the comparison between the Central European ways of organization? You said that you don't necessarily deal with precarity here. How do you look at? Is it easier to find scenarios for narratives like this one, looking at Eastern European environment? Is it? I mean, this wouldn't be like, this is not a scenario. 2 weeks of autonomy is not a normal scenario historically, obviously. And how do you relate as a Central European with this this space here, which you can, I mean, you can find funny things here. What I'm trying to say is that, is it more juicy, you know, like to find interesting ways to approach a narrative, or some, you know, to find an idea of a project? Is it like a little bit, but I'm not trying to give it a bad connotation, is it a little bit exotic in a way? Do you play with that in regards to that, you know, maybe, is it apparently a little bit exotic in that way? Because it's very different, I imagine, from, you know, what you're...
I don't know if it's that different. If you talk about, in a way, you know, it's about myths and storytelling. So in a way, you can find these kind of stories everywhere, even in Switzerland, where it is a very clean place with, I like to say, perfectly cut grass. So even there you have absurd stories. Like, for example, if you look at this Jura region with this creation of the Jura Federation together with Mikhail Bakunin, or Nietzsche, who went crazy in the Swiss mountains and so on. So I think in a certain sense, you can find these kind of narrations and stories everywhere if you look a little bit closer. And for me, it was more, I was kind of fascinated in this idea of the Banat Republic, because it's like a small spark in the history of Timișoara and maybe the Banat as such, where you always have like all these different kinds of powers moving through, you know, the Austrians, the Hungarians, Turkish, and so on over centuries. And for me, it was like a little bit maybe like a pin point or a needle that kind of stuck out in the history. But I think your question has a very broad approach when you say Central Europe. So I could not really answer to that dimension in that sense. But yeah, I think in general, there are interesting stories everywhere where humans are.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you again very much, Adrian. I propose now to move on then to Hajnalka to tell us a bit about the mind map that you prepared with the participants. And then each of you will have 5 minutes to talk about your contribution to the school or your experience during the last week.
Okay, thank you so much. So first of all, and again, I'd like to express my thankfulness for this invitation. I think it was a real honor to be the mentor of this year. And it was a great experience for me. As I said to the participants today, I certainly learned a lot in the school. So yeah, and I think Adrian's story was just really like even a too perfect appetizer for this. There were actually so many notions that you mentioned that you will see appearing on our mind map in a second. You know, the antagonisms that lie beneath the surface of like a community, or being on the margin, the relation to hegemony, the relation to power, the notion of failure, the importance of dialogue. Like these are all things that we, I think, talked quite a lot. Chaos came up in relation to control. Also the importance of unproductive time and having fun. I think these were all touched upon in your story. The idea of looking for alternatives and also prefiguring a certain reality in a way to influence reality by playing it, and self-determination. But there were also notions that I realized that are curiously missing from our mind map, such as autonomy for some weird reason. Maybe it was too self-evident, but also like indeterminacy or redundancy would be interesting to discuss further. So basically, what happened this week was that we discussed self-organization, and also in a way we enacted it, even though we didn't initially plan to do so, I guess. And it turned out to be a very, very short time to do so. I was really happy to find myself among young professionals with so many backgrounds and so many experiences. So our working sessions were basically just conversations about like so many aspects of our experiences, that it was like, you know, I had the feeling that we are talking about like so many things at once. And perhaps this is why very organically after Farid Rakun's presentation, and he had these beautiful mind maps, or they call it harvests, that are done by artists who listen to the conversations that go on Zoom in relation to Document of 15 and the Lumbung Interlocal. And so these artists would create these kind of harvests, this visual kind of presentations of the discussion, right? And so the idea came that perhaps we could do a mind map. We could create a mind map together. And maybe I share my screen. Is it okay? And I show. It's so weird. Where is it? I did open it. Wait. I try again, or maybe someone else could help me, because for some reason it doesn't give it to me as an up. Oh, now I have it. Okay. Hey, so so what happened is that that this creating a mind map proved to be actually quite a useful exercise, but also in a way an exercise in self-organizing ourselves, or like definitely to create something together, right? And again, not for the first time, I had to realize that in the moment when you assume that two people understand the same thing under the same notion, you are in the wrong. Even if this notion is a very, you know, oftentimes used tool, such as a mind map. So I think we were under pressure of time because we wanted to use this mind map for the presentation. And we basically didn't agree in the basic things, like what is a mind map, why we are doing it, and what is it for, and how are we doing it. And now that I'm saying it, I'm also realizing is that these were the questions that I asked the participants the first day to kind of think over in relation to their own self-organized project, like what is it, why are you doing it, for whom you are doing it, and how, like what are the methods. So these were the things that we didn't really agree on when starting to do the mind map. And yeah, I guess quite expectedly, in retrospect, it kind of blew up in our faces. In my original idea, I thought that the mind map is something like creating a certain taxonomy that helps to think about self-organization from many aspects. But then others thought that a mind map is more something where you project your visions or your ideas or associations or maybe wishes in relation to what a good way of self-organization should be. So we arrived at this kind of hybrid thing that we initially wanted to have, like, you know, like maybe constellations of words or groupings or different sizes, but we actually didn't really get there. So, and it also makes you realize that we are probably, after this crash course of 6 days, we are not at the point when we can really classify, where we can really summarize or structure. We are still at the point, I think, together where like new ideas keep popping up and new notions and new aspects are kind of appearing on the horizon. So in a way, I think it is in its imperfection a very good summary of where we are standing after 1 week. One thing you can say that we were not bored. And I really hope that this conversation can somehow go on, or, you know, yield to some results maybe in our respective practices. But definitely it was a pleasure to be part of it. And the idea is that yes, after my short intro, the participants who wish so actually have like 5 minutes perhaps to reflect, to add their ideas, experiences, their opinions on the course, on self-organization. So they are free to work with their 5 minutes. So again, thank you so much for this. And perhaps, do you want me to keep on this mind map, or you prefer that I stop sharing and then we can see each other?
I think it would be good to have it on the screen.
To have it on the screen, okay.
Yeah. Because
Okay.
it's the reference that all the participants will have. And also, I guess it would be good, Hoini, if you choose who to talk next. Because
I just wanted to suggest that perhaps the way they appear on my screen, I will ask people to speak to make it easier. So first for me is Ilina, who actually prepared this this mind map. The visual version of our mind map. And yeah, thank you so much for it.
Should I add something about a brief presentation? Should we add a brief presentation of ourselves, or should we just go to?
I think you are free to do whatever you wish.
Okay.
The only thing is that everyone is asked to please keep your 5 minutes so that everyone has time to speak.
I will try to keep my 5 minutes. So first of all, I think these last 6 days were pretty eye-opening for me regarding the surrounding art scene, locally and trans-European wise. It was a good occasion for me to meet people outside of the local art scene. That is why I have taken on the course. It's a main argument. And alongside the connections that I encountered through this course, I'm glad to become aware of the great amount of individuals who are self-organized also in ways that are very similar to mine and my peers. I am a part of an artist one space. And the sessions also challenged me to come to meditate on the idea of an ideal framework that would envision for a better functionality of the self-organized sector. In my opinion, the art scene is in crisis alongside the entire world, and the disparity between the rich and poor sectors of society are enlarging or have become more visible. So I do feel that the art world is on the verge of making of a makeshift that would lead to a sort of reconsideration of its entire internal mechanism. And I do believe that the self-organized movement or initiatives is going to play a bigger role in this probable scenario of rearranging the layers in the art scene. The main themes that affect the world globally, like the historical reconsiderations, the global warming, the fight for representation of minorities, and the migrational context due to war, due to poverty and natural calamities, are what the art scene will stand for in the future. It is a lot political. And I still don't have, at the end of the course, I still do not have a response regarding why I am doing what I'm doing. But nonetheless, I think it was an intense experience, and I really enjoyed some meaningful conversation. Yeah, sorry if I don't know, maybe sometimes I've made weird comments or weird, you know, I was curious in a weird way. And
That's the first weird comment you have, actually.
This one? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all. I think I have 3 minutes. I put my watch, my timer. So I do want to thank you, Hajnalka, for directing us towards this entire scene of conversation, and on the entire team of the School of Autumn for their help, for their support, and for having us 6 intense days. This is my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And the next one for me is Amaya. Please.
Well, let's see. First of all, I will briefly introduce myself. I am Amaya Molinet. I am an artist, a researcher, and curator from the Basque Country, interested in identity and sense of belonging issues, as well as in site-specific projects. In summary, because I will try to summarize, during this week we have spoken not so much, about curatorship, but mostly about self-organization, which was the idea, and which goes a step beyond from the role of the curator itself. And somehow, when curators become self-organizers, I consider that they shake out the implicit elitism or elitist connotations that are, well, that are on that. Actually, many of us are not just curators, but also artists, referring to participants. I mean, artists, researchers, or I mean, hybrid professional profiles. And I also would like to ask the following kind of rhetorical question. Are we all those things? I mean, we assume those roles because we have a certain common concern. Perhaps we share a similar sense of responsibility, and all of us are aware of the needs in our respective contexts. Maybe self-organization may be individual, but necessarily, or in almost every case, at least, it tends to be collective. It somehow means a sort of altruism, even when it's motivated by a self-convenience. Never mind. What else? Well, in short, this experience has allowed us to reflect on too many issues that are not always apparently coherent. And in my opinion, the first step is facing it and assimilating it. And well, as Hajnalka showed before, the final exercise we did was this mind map, which is a work in progress mind map, and in which it is reflected the very enriching complexity we share from our different backgrounds. There are several concepts and ideas that appear drawn as categories or labels. Some of them look juxtaposed to each other, while others, how to say this, it seems that even they can cancel each other when putting them in a common bubble. Well, apart from that, our way of working is a continuous, or it has been a continuous paradox, but I consider it something very positive. And perhaps the most honest thing is to admit it in order to use it as a sort of fortress. We dream of ways of doing things which ideally would be free of hierarchies, or maybe this is a personal consideration. But the first thing we do when drawing a map is creating those hierarchies. So there is the first paradox. At the same time, several terms of different level of complexity or accuracy, they appear as peers together. So this is ending now, and I personally have more questions than answers. I think that Lina said something similar to this. I think it is good, I think. And well, I would like to finish my intervention with a rhetorical question to each of you. And it will be that, what's the reason to be, la raison d'être, the impulse, the motivation, the energy that moves you to self-organize or to carry out a self-organized project, collective or not? And well, that's it. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, first of all, Hajnalka, for leading this project, and thank you for everything to the organizers, my colleagues, and that's it.
Thank you, Maya. The next one for me is Adrian, but we give him a break this time. It seems like he needs it. And then, yeah, actually, Linda expressed her their wish not to speak today, so we respect that. As she's an artist at risk. But I would like to thank them as well for their contribution throughout the week, which was super relevant and interesting and led to some of the most exciting conversations, I guess, or most illuminating conversations. So Adelina, it's your turn.
Hello, good evening. Yes, so I will start my 5 minutes. Maybe I will not be that long. It's just a reflection that I try to squeeze in today after or in between these too many presentations we had. And because this 6-7 days took a toll on my energy, I will just read my thoughts. And I apologize if some of them I already shared, so I hope it's not redundant, because there are some thoughts we already spoke about during the courses. So first, I would like to thank Art Encounters and Cluj Cultural Center for organizing this school. My interest to participate was to explore the dimensions of self-organization together with the participants and with the course leader, Hajnalka, whose work I and many people admire. And she managed to facilitate a critical excursion into the problematics of self-organization through her own commitment, values, and vision, but also through the work of other practitioners, some of which I have been following for the past years and some which I had the privilege to know just now. I believe that critical encounters are not those which aim at reaching conclusions, but those who allow questions to emerge, and also which allow the shaping of a collective voice informed by both our affinities and also antagonisms. And I think this is what the course has also provided. And this exercise of listening to different self-organized projects and initiatives felt like a mirror which was placed to our own selves, reflecting our shared struggles and feeble enjoyments, which simulated a temporary safe space of not feeling alone, of that we are in this together. So it offered a constant and intermittent reflection of the past and future, thinking about how much has been done on self-organization, but also questioning what else could the future bring when looking at these dreadful times we're living in the world, and particularly the art world. Although at times it felt like we are a dissipated group who commits to self-sabotaging by working in uncertain terrains, optimism was still an underlying dimension we all somehow tried to hold on to. We've seen that self-organization, even though simulated through this short and small scale platform under the name of the Autumn School, it requires time, common interests, but also shared values. And nevertheless, self-organization requires much more, and some of you are already sharing these thoughts and this dimension that we also mapped out. But my proposition for now and the way I try to work is to continue questioning the grounds we find ourselves in, both geographically and as individuals who operate within different sets of relations. Our work is a constant quest of looking around us and how we can be relevant and needed without neglecting the necessity to intersect with other humans and non-humans alike from different locales and socio-political agencies. And if I have to navigate around the mind map, which we attempted to create together, I would stop at the outward dimension related to this broad perspective of locality, because I think this is what informs almost everything about the way we can and should organize ourselves, without denying that self-organized practices can form in actually any corner of this world. As my own identity and mode of operation has been shaped by living and working in these two regions that belong to the periphery and which do not offer much options other than to be self-organized as an imperative for survival and posterity, this places me and us in a position of inevitable marginalization, not partaking in the international neoliberal game of legitimation, which happens at different levels, not in the periphery or at the bottom of the hierarchical chain. We have seen that translocal and transnational solidarities are slowly being shaped worldwide, even though at least imagined. But the question is translocality a way to step out our marginality, both the one that is imposed on us by the circumstances and the ones that we self-impose? And do we need to move away from the periphery altogether when we know that we are to enter an arena of contestation and power? We have also understood that self-organization is not synonymous with collectivity, and that its spirit is not informed by a unified belief of creating divisions, but it proposes halfways, intersections with the establishment, with the institutional. In this sense, interdependence and intersection is a constant negotiation that takes place not only between self-organized practices and the institutional, but also between the individual and the community, the group, the platform we create, although sometimes just temporarily. And while this can appear problematic to some, how does one go about establishing intersections between the institutional and non-institutional, and on what and whose terms? How to grasp the specificities of each locality and the contingencies around us, and how to become and stay relevant. From the presentations of self-organized practices in Romania and elsewhere, at which we had the chance to listen in this school, and through our own experiences, which are inherently precarious, apparently, we need to constantly reflect on these possibilities of acting within the set of power structures that currently exist around us. And to end in a more optimistic note, perhaps, self-organization is also understood through its fluidity and adaptation, so constantly moving and expanding body. And I believe there are possibilities of working alongside the establishment. We can parasite institutions that are inactive or dormant. We can create solidarities that are resistant if one would have the energy to do so. Or we can continue doing minor interventions that once they build up, they will form a wide network of practices. They will form a movement, a potential tool, or a way of being that we can pass on to future generations. So I think one has to keep hopeful about the possibilities of creating solidarities and possibly, but only possibly, produce change. So thank you, and yeah, thank you again, Hajnalka, and all the participants. It was a real pleasure, and I hope to see you again in the near future.
Thank you, Adelina. It was wonderful. I also wanted to mention that we already have a WhatsApp group and a plan for a Monday meeting, so that looks hopeful for the future collaboration, or at least future conversations. Okay, so who's next? Luminita, if you'd like to continue.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to break on this optimism.
Yeah, it was a cautious optimism.
Okay, so I'm Luminita from Iași, Romania. I'm really happy that I could make it till the end of the school. It wasn't easy at all for me to show up when I did, and I still have to catch up some of the presentations and discussions that happened around here. My profile and my background is quite mixed. So I'm a former artist curator, working in the IT industry and raising 2 children and writing about art. I made a very simple structure of what I'm presenting. So first of all, I will try to say what I came for, why I applied, why I joined this school. At first, I mean, not at first. Firstly, I feel like I came up clean with no attachments to any organization or institutions. So that's why I had I was quite enthusiastic about seeing whether I could find some tools or some strategies on how to grow myself in the field of curating. And I think I've embraced the title of this school, the self-organization, through the myself organization. So I'll go now through the keywords that that stood out for me and that remained in my head. The first one is structure, and also in the context of power structure. This keyword, this word, still raises an eyebrow to me regarding self-organization, since structure is so close to an institution in my understanding of it. Then there was collaboration, but also in contrast to personal autonomy and independence. And then there was this duality that we reached to today, this morning, about who you work for and who you work with. I think these were the main points that remained with me and on which I still have to reflect on. So what I am taking from this school, from all the discussions that happened, I defined for myself self-organization as being something about building something. So I try to find a synonym or something. How do you build something? Maybe that's in a more pragmatic way. And again, the group and all the speakers in the presentations have focused a lot on this idea of collaboration, of networking, of interaction, intersection, of finding someone who you are very much alike and who to work with, just to be able to create a cluster and to organize yourself in the plural. And I often found myself that it wasn't the case for me. So building this something is actually a lot about the self and the myself that I mentioned earlier, and about loneliness and solitude, which is much harder actually. So what I'm taking out from this school is this question: how will I stand alone in the face of institutions and in the face of institutionalized friends, let's say friends, so people who are around me and who work in the art field and who are institutionalized little by little. So yeah, these ideas applied outside the art field also. And yeah, I think yeah, I had one final note which I wrote, and I said that I actually wished for this autumn school to help me find an answer of where to find freedom in curatorial practices. And now I actually realized that maybe curating itself is impossible to be about freedom. So since to curate means to engage with at least one artist, one situation, or one already existing structure. So I'm still a bit still searching. I don't know. Yeah, this remains like an empty checkbox, let's say, for the self-organization regarding curatorial practices. Yeah. hope I'm not very pessimistic with you all. Yeah.
No, thank you
would
so
be
much,
it.
Luminita. No, I
Yeah.
don't think so. I agree with you, but it all starts with the personal self-organization, right? It's very important for finding any integrity among these shifting parameters. Thank you so much. We have Veronica. Would you like to continue?
I'll be happy to. So good evening, dear colleagues. My reflection, fortunately or not, will be brief, since my inner battery, even though being recharged for the whole week, for now is extremely low. And it feels like more time for analysis and awareness is needed. Though when today we were discussing the utopist models of the self-organization, an insight came up that we were likely to achieve at least one of them. And it was already mentioned today that any self-organization starts from a dialogue, whether it's a dialogue with yourself, with your colleagues, with your friends. For the whole duration of the school, I was happy to share that dialogues with all of you and with all those art professionals who generously shared their experiences and inspirations with all of us. And I'm extremely curious where all this will lead us in the nearest future. And I hope to engage even more, and that if taking something from our mind map, which is currently visible, that the future perfect will be full of friendship, trust, and having fun. So thank you for this experience.
Thank you very, very much, Veronica. I think the future perfect is a great notion to have as the final notion. I think unless the organizers want to reflect as well, because I think all the participants who are present have talked already. So I would give you the possibility as well to reflect if you want to.
Yes, before that, I wanted to make sure we have a comment here in our Zoom meeting. I think that Linda would like her statement to be read. And Gia, can you help me with that?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
So
and yes, first we read
I didn't see that.
her.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. First, we read Linda's statement, and then I do have some final comments on everything that happened here. And I'm really, really happy to hear about the dialogue being developed further, and the group functioning also. I think that this is really important, and it's one of the tasks of this school actually, to create this kind of relations between peers, and not only around curating, but around other notions that we are all concerned with. So Gia, do you have the statement?
yes, I do.
Super, thank you.
From an artist and curator at risk. During the last week, conversations, meetings, and listenings took place between several professionals from the art community who met each other with open minds, intense discussions, and warm hearts. I will take with me the many stories and projects that speaks to the stubbornness, passion, hard work, and willingness to start over and over again in attempts to create something. This utterly naive love for the expression, philosophy, method, and spirit we call art reflects so well the pure will of human beings to not only receive, but also to give and to create. This week has been mind-blowing and heartfelt, and I met people who inspired me to think differently, to give time to figure out the other through and understanding and a non-understanding. To also project and reflect on others' work and feelings while producing as well as on mine. To see the limitations, the nervousness, the struggle, the hardship through the eyes of others, and I also myself experienced while working with art, has been awakening. I realized that we live in a time of crisis, and the crisis has been present during this course. It has been present as a reminder through the extreme complexity in which many projects presented has been taking place in the most difficult time. It has been present through our own fights with technology and reaching to the digital wall between us. To be and exist in a time of global pandemic and world catastrophe is challenging. With this in mind, I admire my peers in a way that is beyond the admirations of respect of colleagues in general. I see us all as some of the remaining forces keeping the world alive with these naive attempts to create in whatever context of early chaos. I love us just as much as I love the sea, the trees, the sun, the pandas, the dolphins, and the ability to dream. It is with big gratefulness that I wish you all peace within and without a calm, safe space, may it be big or small, to continue this work of bold, wild, and wonders. Thank you all so much. Thank you for existing. Thank you to the Autumn School of Curating and all its organizers. You make the world not only better, you make my world. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. This really heartfelt statement. And thanks for everyone who made the effort to articulate thoughts at the very end. I really missed Kaur, who was with us throughout the week and really actively participated in our conversations. But yeah, this is also what Linda mentioned, that they also had problems with the internet throughout the week, and they wrote today that it finally kind of made it for them possible to participate in this final event. Yes, so Diana, you said that you wanted to contribute.
Yes, I would just like to say that I'm very impressed by all the participants in the school and the fact that this is actually the third time that I really feel that the school provides a space of not only, you know, theory, sharing and developing concepts and things related to the curatorial practice, but also it shapes a space of true friendship, honesty, and care, which are notions that I think are equally important nowadays. And this notion of care, I do believe it should be more present somehow in the whole art system. And also I wanted to thank all the guests of the school. I think it was really nice of all the voices that also, you know, contributed to the knowledge of this school. And also another observation I have, it relates to this final reflections, the fact that at the end we leave with more questions than answers. For me, it's a very good sign, and I do believe that just like, I don't know, exhibitions or books that we read or anything related to our profession, once you have more questions than answer at the end of a process, I think you are enriched and also on your way to research further and to to enrich yourself. So among the questions that I think will stay with us for a while are what drives us to continue, how to become and stay relevant, what are the possibilities of solidarity and change, where do we find freedom in the curatorial practice, also where we find integrity in these shifting parameters. And also I want to thank all of you for reminding me of three notions that I tend to forget during these crazy busy times, which is friendship, trust, and fun. So thank you all very, very much for this last week. Thank you, Hajnalka, Adrian, all our guests and our collaborators and Cluj Cultural Center and everybody who was involved in the school. And I do hope that this group stays together further, and we are here wherever you, whenever you want and for whatever you need. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana.